The mansion stood at the edge of Blackwood Hill in New Orleans, Louisiana, a place locals avoided even during daylight. The iron gates were bent inward as if something from inside had once tried to escape. The house was built in 1892 by the Caldwell family, one of the richest names in the South, but wealth did not protect them from what followed. Ethan Miller first saw the mansion through rain-soaked glass as his cars slowed near the hill. He was a historical archivist hired to document abandoned properties, and Blackwood Mansion was his final assignment. He had read about the place, missing heirs, unexplained fires, servants who vanished overnight, yet none of the reports prepared him for the feeling in his chest the moment he stepped onto the property. The air felt heavier, almost thick, like breathing through water. His phone lost signal immediately. The wind carried whispers, not words, but something close enough to language that it made his skin crawl. Inside the mansion, everything smelled of rotten old perfume. The floorboards groaned even when he stood still. The walls were stained with dark patches that looked like shadows burned into the wood. Ethan began recording voice notes describing the rooms, the grand hall, the cracked mirror, the staircase that curved upward like a spine. Then he noticed something strange. Dust covered everything except the footprints leading upstairs. They were small, barefoot, and fresh. Ethan followed them against his better judgment. Each step upward felt like crossing into colder air. On the second floor, a door at the end of the hall was slightly open. The footprints stopped there. Inside was a child's bedroom, untouched by decay. Toys sat neatly arranged on shelves. A rocking horse slowly moved back and forth without wind. Ethan whispered hello. The rocking stopped. Behind him, the door slammed shut. The temperature dropped instantly. His breath turned white. A voice spoke close to his ear, soft and broken. "You should not be here." The walls began to bleed. Dark stains streamed downward as if the house itself was wounded. Ethan rushed to the door, pulling with all his strength, but it would not open. The whisper returned louder this time. "They all run. They all leave. But the house keeps them." Suddenly the door opened on its own and Ethan fell forward into the hallway. The mansion was silent again. The stains gone, the footprints vanished. Shaking, Ethan ran downstairs and out the front door without looking back. That night in his hotel room he reviewed his recordings. But his voice was not alone. Between his words were other voices, crying, laughing, screaming, repeating one sentence over and over. "Welcome home." Ethan quit the project the next morning and left New Orleans, but weeks later he woke to the sound of floorboards creaking in his apartment. The smell of old perfume filled the air. And barefoot footprints led to his bedroom door. The mansion had followed him. Ethan Miller tried to convince himself that leaving New Orleans meant escaping Blackwood Mansion, but the house had already carved a space inside his mind. His apartment in Chicago felt unfamiliar. Every night stretched longer. Shadows gathered where they should not. The footprints appeared again and again, small, bare, damp, as if the child had walked through rain. Each time they stopped at his bedroom door. Each time Ethan refused to open it. Sleep became impossible. When he did sleep, he dreamed of hallways that twisted into themselves, doors that led back to the same room, mirrors that showed him standing behind himself watching. He began hearing the whispers during the day, grocery stores, elevators, crowded streets, a soft chorus always saying the same thing. "The house remembers." Driven by desperation, Ethan contacted an old colleague, Professor Daniel Hargrove, a paranormal historian based in Savannah, Georgia. Hargrove listened without interruption and then said something that froze Ethan. "Blackwood is not a single location. It is a doorway." Hargrove explained that certain mansions across the United States were built on land saturated with trauma, plantations, hospitals, estates where generations suffered. These houses were connected not physically but spiritually. They fed each other, strengthening through shared memory. Once someone was marked by one, they became visible to all. "There are others like Blackwood," Hargrove said, "and if one has you, the rest will find you." Against every instinct, Ethan agreed to meet him in Savannah at a place called Greystone Manor, an abandoned estate outside the city known locally as a cursed inheritance. Greystone had been sealed after a series of family deaths spanning nearly a century. They arrived at dusk. The mansion loomed pale and cracked, its windows dark like empty eyes. Spanish moss hung from dead trees, brushing Ethan's shoulders as they walked toward the entrance. The moment Ethan stepped inside, his chest tightened. The smell was identical to Blackwood, old perfume and wet wood. Hargrove began setting up recording equipment, candles, salt lines, symbols scratched into the floor. He spoke of containment, of observing without provoking. But the house did not care. A grandfather clock at the end of the hall began ticking, though its hands were missing. The sound echoed louder and louder until Ethan felt it in his teeth. Then the walls shifted, hallways elongating, doors sliding away. "They are rearranging us," Hargrove whispered. A woman's voice echoed from above, crying softly. Ethan recognized the tone, grief layered with rage. They followed the sound up a staircase that had not been there moments before. In the master bedroom a figure stood near the window, a woman in a torn 1800s dress, her neck bent at an unnatural angle, her eyes were hollow pits spilling darkness. She turned slowly toward Ethan and smiled. "You brought another one." The door slammed shut behind them, the walls sealed smooth as stone. The woman moved closer, her voice multiplied, overlapping with others, children, men, women, all speaking at once. "You cannot leave. You can only join." Hargrove shouted a command, throwing salt toward the spirit. The room shook violently. The woman screamed, her form splitting into shadows that crawled along the ceiling. Suddenly Ethan saw it, the truth layered beneath the room, faces pressed into the walls, hundreds of them, eyes open, mouths screaming silently. They were not ghosts alone, they were memories trapped alive within the structure. The mansion was not haunted. It was hungry. The floor collapsed beneath them. Ethan fell into darkness, landing hard on stone. He was alone now. The space was underground, a vast foundation carved with names, dates, symbols scratched by desperate hands. Candles lit themselves, revealing a circle of child-sized handprints burned into the floor. The whisper returned stronger than ever. "You ran once. You came back. Now stay." Ethan felt hands grab his ankles, pulling him backward toward the circle. He screamed, clawing the floor, blood streaking behind him. Above he heard Hargrove chanting frantically, then abruptly stopping. Silence. The hands tightened. The darkness rose. And then everything went still. Ethan awoke lying outside the mansion, dawn light breaking through the trees. Greystone Manor stood quiet and empty, as if nothing had happened. Hargrove was gone. The equipment gone. The entrance sealed shut like it had never been opened. Police later reported no record of Professor Daniel Hargrove ever existing. But that night, in Ethan's reflection, he noticed something new. A shadow standing behind him, smiling. And far away across the country another mansion awakened. Ethan no longer trusted silence, it followed him like a living thing. After Greystone he stopped sleeping indoors. He drove west without destination, motels, rest stops, abandoned lots, yet every place he stayed began to change. Floors creaked, walls breathed, mirrors showed rooms that were not there. The shadow behind him grew clearer each day. It did not move, it did not blink, it only smiled. Ethan finally found answers in a forgotten archive beneath an old courthouse in St. Louis, Missouri. The documents were never digitized, never indexed, only handwritten journals, land deeds, blueprints drawn in red ink. What he learned shattered the last piece of normal reality he had left. The mansions were built deliberately. In the late 1800s, a secret society of architects, clergy, and physicians believed trauma could be harvested. They believed suffering left an imprint stronger than death. Children, the sick, enslaved families were used as anchors, their pain soaked into the land. Then the houses were built not to contain ghosts but to trap moments of terror forever. Each mansion became a living memory engine. When one filled, it reached outward, connecting to others, creating a network, a living system. The houses fed on witnesses. Anyone who entered and survived carried the signal, marking themselves as future fuel. Ethan was not being haunted. He was being prepared. The final document mentioned one place above all others: Red Hollow Estate in rural West Virginia, the first mansion, the heart. If Red Hollow fell, the others would starve. Ethan drove through fog-covered mountains until the road ended at rusted gates. Beyond them the estate stretched, massive and broken, its windows glowed faintly like dying embers. As he stepped inside, every voice he had ever heard returned at once. The halls twisted violently, dragging him forward. The shadow detached from the wall, finally becoming whole. It was Ethan, older, hollow-eyed, twisted by regret. "You cannot destroy it," the shadow said. "You can only replace it." The truth settled cold and absolute. Someone had to remain, someone had to remember everything. The house showed him the past, children screaming, walls closing, families disappearing, generations feeding the structure, and it showed him the future: endless mansions, endless witnesses, unless the cycle stopped. Ethan walked into the center of the estate where the foundation pulsed like a heart. He knelt and placed his hands on the stone. The house screamed. The walls cracked, windows shattered, shadows burned away, the network collapsed. Across the country mansions fell silent, doors unlocked, footprints faded, whispers died. Red Hollow stood empty. Years later locals said the estate was safe, birds nested inside, sunlight touched every room, but some nights a single light glowed in the basement. And a man's shadow could be seen standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. Because the houses were gone. But the memory remained. And it was still hungry.